While two former chairmen of the FA have told Sky News they don't have confidence in the governing body to address issues of diversity in football.
I'm not sure.
What's going on? What's going on?
How you doing?
I'm doing very great. How about yourself?
Good. Oh, stressed.
Alrighty, well let's make this quick. So by the way, first off I want to say that the team that you're leading, Doncaster Rovers, has had a big history. I mean, the club was founded in 1879, it's been a long time. And I also saw that you were in the Army, but then transitioned into helping soccer players. What made you want to transition into soccer from being in the Army and then, leading, players from 13 to 16-year-old?
Well, I think it was mainly, I've always played football as my main sport. I coached lots of other sports as well,
Okay.
but I played football as my main sport. And then when I was getting out of the Army and thinking, what am I going to do as a second career, it would be sort of physical training orientated. And as it happened, I get the sort of the top level coaching qualifications, all paid for by the Army at the time.
Oh wow!
And then I'd done some coach education work with the FA.
Mm-hmm.
So I just started looking at ways of making money making money from football, really, in terms of doing some coach education courses with for the FA. And I happened to meet a guy on a course that the club were looking for top qualified coaches.
Okay.
I got a part-time job with a professional football club with Rotherham United.
Oh wow.
And then they were running a college academy.
Oh, okay.
With a local.
Mm-hmm.
Over it's called a sixth form college. Well, I don't know what that would be the equivalent of over there. It's kind of pre-university, post.
Yeah. So over here we have, at least for colleges in the U.S., there's obviously we call it D1, which is it's the highest level in college, and then there's D2 and then D3, and I believe up to D4, and then it's just a community college, which is just a local college where they still train players, but they just play with schools around the city, you can call it. But most importantly, I mean, why helping? Because there's not a lot of, at least that I've noticed, a lot of coaches that help, young players between 13 to 16-year-old. Why that specific phase?
In my case, I kind of dropped into it. Having, when you work as a physical training instructor in the Army, you work a lot of the time with, you work across all age groups.
Yeah.
The majority, the turnover is always at men 16, 17, 18 years old.
Mm-hmm.
But when I got out of the Army, the first club that I went to work for, the vacancy was with the under 16s, and they felt that's the age group to stick me with. And the more I worked at that level, the more I realised that was the level that I wanted to work at. I looked at the younger age groups. In English pro academies, they first sign at 8 years old, so under 9 through under 12, 13 would be classed as the foundation phase. Okay. I'm perfectly honest with it. I didn't really have the to work with the kids at that age group. We had really good coaches who could specialise with those younger age groups, and it wasn't really for me. I wanted to work with 11-a-side football.
Okay. So what would you say is your coaching philosophy in soccer from helping, the ages to 13 or 16? Like when you train players and help them development, what are you telling your players, and what do you really believe in? Is the principles coming from the Army and then into soccer, or do you change the philosophy just a little bit?
I think that a lot of the key principles would be the same in terms of, being disciplined, being organised, being responsible for yourself.
Yeah.
But at the same time, you're part of, you as an individual are part of something bigger.
Yeah.
So the team is the overriding factor. Now, in pro academy football over here, you're not trying to develop teams. You're trying to develop the individuals within the team.
Yeah.
It's certainly more about process than outcome.
Okay.
You use the word better in the wrong context sometimes, but players that you see that have the most potential to go on, you have to find different ways to challenge them, but at the same time you've got to challenge everybody equally, give everybody an equal opportunity.
Yeah, but how do you find that balance? Because when I used to play soccer, I always had the hard time of like, okay, there was other players that were certainly better, more ambitious, yet other players, hated to be challenged. How do you balance the players who want to win and then the others who don't really have that desire? And how do you find that gap so that everybody is in line and they can create a winning culture?
I think in our job that's slightly different, because the kids that are in academies at pro clubs, you all want to be pros, and they've all got a certain level of ability to get them in the door in the first place. It's not like recreational clubs where you can go, you go if you fancy it. You might not want to turn up for training, but you'll still expect a game at the weekend, that kind of thing. There's already a certain amount of discipline and a certain amount of intrinsic motivation in the majority of the players that are in that system. So whatever level you play at, you look at the pro game and Messi's better than everybody else in Barcelona's team. Ronaldo's better than everybody in Juventus' team. That's not to say the others are rubbish. There's just different levels of good.
Yeah, for sure. And I guess this leads to my next question. Like, between the ages of 13 to 16 and then going on 17, 18, 19 and pro, what do you think changes from your experience from 16, 17, 18, 19 and pro? Do they still focus on the development, the technical, or is more about the mentality of a player in order to, I guess, see in the future?
Yeah, it's a tricky balance really, because once they get to 16 over here, if they're in a pro club and they get for what we call a scholarship, the old apprenticeship. So you then go from being a part-time footballer with ambitions and hopes, you basically go into a full-time football program. So that's the start of your career. But it's a million miles away from the pro game.
Wow.
Yes, you've got to have a certain amount of talent. You've got to have a certain kind of mentality. And those things will carry on hardening over the next 2 years. Because the next critical stage is when you get to 18. Now, if you're at a Liverpool, a Man United, a Chelsea, for example, at 18, you don't have to be first team ready. There's a lot of money in the game. The squads are bigger. They have a lot more time to work with players, and a lot more that they can put in terms. So, I'll give you an example. Jesse Lingard at Man United. Jesse Lingard supposedly well behind the curve, but they could afford to look at his potential, nurture him alongside some other players for another 2, 3, 4 years, not the same big bucks as some of the other players. Whereas at our club and the clubs that I've worked at previously, which are League One and League Two, there you're looking at, in some cases, the first team manager needs those players to be first ready at 18. So, if you like, if they're lucky enough to get a pro contract at 18 and they get thrown into that first team environment, a lot of it's sink or swim, and a lot of
Oh, wow. Okay.
the pros that I've spoken to have said it's not your first contract, it's not your first pro contract that counts. It's getting your second one, because most of those 18-year-olds will get a pro contract at 18, but their game time will be very limited over the next year unless they're a real talent.
And
so
that brings back a lot of memories, because it brings back the player from Paris, Kylian Mbappe, who obviously won the World Cup super young, 18 or 19, I believe. Yet he's already, rumors, again, I'm not sure if this is true, but negotiating the second contract for potentials with Real Madrid or Barcelona. But what do you think that dynamic is? Do you think the second contract is still mandatory, even though he already won the World Cup?
I mean, for someone like that,
Yeah.
A no-brainer. You know that he's got that real top-level talent.
Yeah.
When you're working at, the majority of pros in this country don't play in a Premier League.
Yeah.
The majority English/Brit pros play around League One, League Two, National League, which is the one below that.
Yeah.
And most of those teams now are full time. So that's if you go through the old system where the Premier League was Division One. This is like now Division 5.
Okay.
Of teams with full time professionals in it.
Mm-hmm.
These leagues, like the Bundesliga in Germany, Ligue 1 in France, Spain, there's really only 2 top divisions where they're all full-time pros. In this country, there's 5 divisions. There's 24 teams in each of those divisions. Some of those clubs can carry big squads. So the likes of Chelsea, it's well documented. For example,
Mm-hmm.
they might have 30 players from their development group out on loan.
Wow.
Around Europe, around the world.
Jeez.
Different clubs in England. They've got partner clubs in Holland, in Belgium. So they'll get those players between 18 and 23. They might play a year in England, go to Belgium for a year, go to Holland for a year, where they're experiencing different cultures, playing in different first teams.
Yeah. Okay.
And some of those players will still never play in Chelsea's first team.
Okay. Why do you think that is?
Because if you're at Chelsea and a talent like Mbappe, for example, you mentioned Mbappe.
Yep.
If he comes up for sale, Chelsea join in the auction. If you can get Mbappe, you don't have to stick the player who's been in Belgium for a year, in Holland for a year, in your first team. You might farm him out again
Mm-hmm.
and see if he develops until he's good enough to play alongside Mbappe. But in the meantime, the next world superstar from somewhere else is coming along.
Exactly. Yeah. Okay.
You don't have to be able to afford to develop players if you can buy them. If you can buy them ready-made off the shelf, most clubs will take that short-term mentality, because a manager's career is a very short-lived thing.
Well, yeah, and not only that, but I mean, would you agree that the player, because if he already is coming out and he has the potential, not only does it improve the manager's career to staying at the club, but like, let's be honest, it also has a better chance to win more championships for the team, more money, and then when that player gets older, well, now they have the goods to, buy even more superstars, right?
Yeah. Or sell the guys, grown guys like, I'm trying to think of a good example now. Oh, all right. So last night, Doncaster Rovers played in this. It's kind of a minor cup competition over here.
Okay.
And some of the opposition are the sort of under 23 development sides from the Cat 1 academies, so from your big clubs. So we played a team last night. You'll have heard of them, I'm sure, called Wolves.
Yes.
Wolverhampton.
Yep.
The guy who scored their 2 goals is an 18-year-old
Wow.
that they paid £35 million for.
Wow.
We had a 17-year-old who's not yet a full-time pro, started the game for us. It only cost £20 million to build our stadium. You know, they had one player who was worth more than it cost to build our stadium.
Wow.
And that's just one in their squad.
Yeah, like it brings back another great example. Like when you look, a perfect example would be Philip Coutinho, who's in Barcelona. I think they paid 180 million pounds or euros, which is
Euros, yeah.
in Barcelona. Yet he underperformed. They loaned him on Bayern Munich. He goes on, wins the Champions League, which was last year. Bayern beats Barcelona 8-2, and Philip Coutinho scores 2 goals, and now they have him back at Barcelona. Yet he still underperforms, and now I believe a 17-year-old from Barcelona replaced him.
Yeah. You know, sometimes for all the money that clubs spend on players, it doesn't always work out for one reason. So you've got, Andy Carroll moved from Newcastle to Liverpool for £50 million. And everybody raised their eyes at the time because of the size of the fee.
Yeah.
But Liverpool was still trying to get back to where they are now. They were selling Torres. Torres was starting to become unhappy at Liverpool. So, you know, they needed a replacement. And it just happens sometimes.
Yeah.
These kids, not just kids, people move from one part of the world to another to play football. But if there's something else going on in their home life, they don't get on with the language, they don't settle in the area, that's going to affect the way they play football. So that side, that psychological side, is really, really vital. And like the likes of which you just said, those kinds of situations are, they're fairly rare, but when the money's there, sometimes the money cushions the blow.
Yeah, and I think like there's a lot of players, people who are just fans, and you know, I guess you can call them outsiders, are always talking about, oh, you know, Messi doesn't move, or this player moved to a different team and he joined here. They don't take into fact that, hey, you know, there are so many different outside factors that just isn't about their performance. Like maybe family problems can cause a player to perform badly, or like you said, they don't like the city. They may not even like the food, and therefore, you know what? Let's move to a different club where it's actually far more enjoyable.
Yeah, I mean, back in the 80s, there was a player at Liverpool called Ian Rush. And Ian Rush is one of the hottest properties in Europe at the time. Moved to Juventus, and one of the things that he admitted to was the fact that, you know, he just didn't like the food. He couldn't get, you know, basic English stuff like baked beans, for example. Yeah. And he only lasted a year in Italy and ended up moving back over here. He wouldn't be the only example of that. Yeah.
So what would you say is the biggest difference then, since you said there's 5 divisions over there in your country that were Doncaster, the Rovers, you know, 5th division, 4th, 3rd, up to the Premier. What would you say is the difference between the 5th division and, let's say, the Premier League, besides in, you know, skill and the technical side?
I mean, you could talk about all sorts of things, infrastructure, what's the training ground like. But the bottom line is players. I think you end up playing, on the whole, you end up playing at the level you deserve to. Whether that is ability or attitude, and certainly also opportunity. There's very few examples these days of players getting to 23, 24, 25 in lower league football who suddenly end up at the top clubs, because in the meantime, these top clubs they're scouting in Europe, they're scouting in South America. These big clubs have got scouts everywhere, all over the world. And, you know, there isn't a player coming through that they don't know about in this country from probably under 6, under 7. They've got scouts, they've got spotters, they've got people in schools, they've got people watching grassroots games you know, all the time.
Wow.
So
I guess that's a perfect opportunity to say that if you're a soccer player, it's important to give it your 100% every time, because like you said, there's someone that a scout that knows a friend, and that friend knows another friend, and then that friend knows another friend that's watching you develop from 6, 7, 8, 9 up to 19, 20. And that could say, you know what, I've been watching this player since he's very young. He has the mentality, he has that work ethic, and I feel he has potential. And then that could be your shot. Would you agree?
absolutely.
Yeah.
And they'll look, you know, anybody can spot a talented kid. What you don't know about is what his mentality is like. What's he like away from it? What's he like at school? He might be a kid who comes alive on the football pitch, but he's an absolute nightmare everywhere else.
Yeah.
You know, and those kinds of things are important too, because people often won't take a risk on a troublemaker. It might not be him. There might be something in the background in the family that's a little bit dubious. So, you know, there's certainly more to it than just watching football matches and seeing who's the best kid on the pitch.
Yeah.
And if clubs feel that they're going to make a big investment in terms of time spent coaching him, bringing him into the system, they may relocate certain kids at certain ages and put them in private schools, for example. Some of the big clubs do.
Mm-hmm.
That's a lot of investment. It turns out that the kid or somebody behind the kid is a bit of a chancer, a bit of a dodgy character. Then, if that goes down a pan because at 15 the kid gets himself in trouble or just goes out of love with football, then, you know, you might have already invested £1 million in that boy.
Yeah, and also, I mean, not sure if you agree with this, but let's say you find someone who's talented and you decide to invest. And like you said, he's very great on the field, but he's terrible off the field. Not only will that player misrepresent that club, but it also, I guess, hurts that team's reputation in order to actually bring in different players from different brands or soccer companies. What do you think? What impact do you think that has?
No, I think that's really important.
Mm-hmm.
You've only got to see the way that people have reacted over here. There's been a few high-profile players who've got involved with breaking lockdown rules, for example, around the team. You know, okay, these players will come out and apologise.
Mm-hmm.
You know, are they apologising because they got caught? Are they apologising because because the club tells them to? Are they apologising because they're genuinely sorry that they did it? You know, you don't know unless you know that person. But clubs are very conscious of the way that they're portrayed at the lower level in the local area. So, you know, if one of our kids was coming to training on his own, let's say he's got a bus into town and he's going to walk down to the training ground, and he was causing trouble in town, if he's wearing our club badge, someone will phone the football club. Oh, what's your players are doing this? And this is, you know, this is just at a low level. You can imagine the kickback from a Premier. You know, you've only got to see every time a Premier League player gets into trouble, it's pretty much headline news. It becomes a front page story instead of a back page story. 24-hour role programs, they all need something to fill the airtime, so they'll jump on it.
Yeah, for sure. So first off, do you have any children or kids?
2 girls, both.
2 girls. Okay. So one of the biggest, at least this is more of a question for, I guess, players in the US, because what I see, and I'm not sure if you struggle, it has to be everywhere, but when a soccer player is super ambitious and wants to become a pro, but they don't have the parents on their side to support them. Let's say they want to become a professional. They don't have maybe the financial terms. They just aren't willing to, the parent isn't willing to help the soccer players. What piece of advice do you have for a parent and a player in order to get together and make it happen, or at least give it a shot?
It's a tough one because you don't want to be telling a parent how to parent their kids.
Yeah.
you know, we've had kids who come through our system who, you know, they're not from the wrong side of the tracks. That wouldn't be the right thing to say, but their parents may not be financially as well off as some of the other parents in the group. So we get kids. We have had kids getting dropped off in Maseratis and Bentleys.
Yeah.
We've had kids whose parents don't own a car, and yet they still turn up for training. The parents are out there watching them in all weathers. I think that with academy football in this country, if the parents didn't back them, it would be almost impossible to get a kid through the system.
Wow. Okay.
We also rely at the lower levels in a majority of clubs that run academies for parents to drive their kids to games, for example. We don't always put a bus on because the parents are going to go and watch the game anyway. So they want to take the kids, they want to bring the kids back. They might stop at a relative's on the way back. For a bus on and pay, you know, £800 for a coach, for it to come back with 4 coaches and a couple of kids on. It's just not financially doable.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, it is important that parents support, but it's equally important that players recognise their parents' situation. It's not a one-way street. You can't be making demands on, you know, if there was, let's say there was me and I got 2 brothers.
Yeah.
If I'm the talented footballer in the family,
yeah,
the other one's a cricketer, one's a good swimmer, we're pulling our parents in 3 different directions.
Yeah. Yeah, and you brought back a memory with my father has a friend, and he has a very great soccer kid who's now traveling. I mean, the coach in the U.S. as one of the leading coaches for, I believe, 9 to 10-year-olds, no, 13-year-olds. But he also has another daughter who's a very great basketball player. Yet her daughter is playing in basketball. His youngest son is pulling him into soccer, even though his younger son is doing better in soccer, yet the daughter wants to actually perform, give it a shot in basketball. And then he has another son who wants to do boxing, right? He wants to be a boxer. And it's kind of like, oh crap, what do I do? It's like pulling at them. And then I think it just overwhelms parents and they don't know what to do, right?
I think that, you know, I haven't had any real-time experience of this, but it must put a lot of pressure on, you know, people's marriages when that kind of situation happens. If you can't compromise, there's only 2 of you and you've got 3 kids, for example. You pick a favorite kid.
Yeah. You can tell, right? Yeah.
It's a tough one, and you know, I have a lot of sympathy with parents in that respect, because it can't be easy to prioritize what you do. Give up your own social life as well at times. You know, we play on Sunday mornings, normally pretty early. If we've got to get up at 7 a.m. or 8 a.m. to leave to go and play somewhere else, you know, there goes your Saturday night with your family, with your friends. We train our 13s to 16s when we're out of COVID, train Monday night, Tuesday night, Thursday night, Saturday morning, play Sunday. That's a hell of a commitment for not only the players, but for the parents to get them there as well.
Yeah, and then also plus their jobs, the bills, the mortgages they have to pay, all that just over time adds up, and that just not only does it burn out the parent but the player, because I've seen players where like their biggest opportunity is shown in front of them. They have the opportunity to they play in front of scouts from Europe, yet they're just so overwhelmed since they've paid so much money to just go to the smaller events and then eventually build their name. Yet when the big shot comes, they're like, we can't make it in this one. And that just, all the progress just goes down the drain pretty much.
I mean, for me, I know it's a different system over there, and but that system doesn't work. Once you see a player, you know, I wouldn't need to see a player repeatedly in order to be good enough to come into our system. In most cases, and this is an experience thing, I guess, with me, and I know with a lot of other coaches, you only need to see a player for part of his first session to know whether he's got something or not.
Wow. Okay.
You would, you know, you wouldn't make a decision based on that.
Mm-hmm.
You can look at them over a period of time, but it's really easy to see the ones that that can't move, that have got no coordination, that can't handle a ball, that don't recognise space, for example. You would see all that in a snapshot of the first session that they come to you with. Now, obviously, you make allowances for nerves and that kind of thing, but it doesn't take forever. It wouldn't take me. I mean, I don't know how your system works, but I wouldn't need to scout a player 6 times before I thought, yeah, he's going to fit in with our program. I'd know after maybe 3 sessions and speaking to some of the people that are around him to find out, well, what's his character like? Because I don't know his character yet. I can see his football ability, but I don't know what his character is.
Wow. Yeah, because I've been told from high school coaches, and maybe they're not as knowledgeable in soccer as others in Europe or who've actually been through, but I've seen, yeah, I need to see a player, you know, for a long period of time, say the whole season, 2 years, but then you say, I only need to see a player 3 sessions, and that just gives me enough information to say, okay, this player will fit, this won't. Maybe that other person, maybe the goalkeeper will actually fit better than the player that I'm actually looking for, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think it also depends how you scout. And if you're scouting
Okay.
to fill up,
Mm-hmm.
and those players have to pay to be on that program,
Yeah.
your bottom line isn't football development. Your bottom line is how much money you can make.
Yeah.
Whereas over here, we have a limited number of players. We run, again, the pro club system is different over here because
Yeah.
we have one team at each age group.
Mm-hmm.
We try and keep the squads to a manageable size so that everybody gets game time. You know, we might have 15, 16 players. There are only 18 scholars, so that's 16 to 18 year group.
Mm-hmm.
There's only 18 over a 2-year period that the education side of it is funded for.
Mm-hmm.
So we 2nd years and 9 first years on our scholarship program.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
So we have to know that we're picking the right players. And still, you look at the numbers that come out of it at the end with a pro career, it's a really small, minuscule figure.
Okay. So my next question then, before we wrap it up here, I've heard a lot of players say that, you know, and they've messaged me, they said, because I'll post a few in videos sharing a couple interviews, pieces of advices that other coaches have said that could benefit players. And some of them say, you know, I'm good enough to be a soccer player, yet I haven't been discovered. What do you tell that player? Like when a player says they're good, like, do you believe, I mean, I know you haven't seen them, but do you think, because when a player says I'm good, I feel like there's always more room to improvement, but I always hear a sense of, you know, I'm not so good yet, but I think I'm good enough to just play another way, just a way to get on a pro team and then develop there. Does that make sense?
It makes sense, but often those players are deluded.
Yeah.
You know, I'm good, but what? You're as good as what?
Exactly.
Are you? If you're the best player in your, year group at school, but you go into an academy, you become one of every good player in every school's year group.
Yeah.
So you go from a big fish in a small pond to a medium-sized fish in a very small pond, and everybody is out to eat everybody else, because at the end of it, there's a limited number of places in terms of progression. So, yeah, you might think you're good, but do you know what it looks like? Do you know what good looks like?
Yeah, and I feel like that's very important, because I was listening to an interview who is not a soccer coach, but a business coach. And his goal is just to teach sales and marketing. And he said, you know, everybody has some greatness in them. You know, I feel like everybody does things to be great. But the problem is that most people don't know what great looks like. And it's back to soccer, you know, how do you know what good looks like? Is it just in your terms? Because your terms may be, a little bit smaller than a player's different terms, and then coaches terms, and then the Premier League's coaches terms, and then you name it, the standards of the owner of the team. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it's different.
Yeah, it goes back to what I was saying earlier on about levels. There's levels, Rooney, when Wayne Rooney broke through in England at 16. So what you want to do is, if it's a 16-year-old who's saying that, they're saying you're good, you're saying you deserve to be here, which 16-year-old are you as good as? Are you as good as Rooney when he was 16?
Mm-hmm.
For example, you can look to a more local level, and we have players like the 17-year-old from our club who played last night in the cup, and made his full debut at the weekend in the FA Cup. Are you as good as him? Because he's now the player that everybody else in our academy can aspire to be. Because he joined our club at under 9. He's seen that there's a pathway, and he's made sure that he's on that pathway every single time. Every time we come to what we call a pinch point or a cut point, one of the year groups where we have to release players or keep them on, he's always made sure that he's in the top echelon of those players.
Wow.
Now those players that are coming through our system are going, right, I need to be like him. What was he doing at those different stages in order to be selected?
Yeah, it's certainly a long journey. I was interviewing Wells Thompson, a former MLS star here in the U.S. who played for the New England Revolution. And he said that, what most people don't see is that, yes, you do need to work hard, have discipline. But he also mentioned something important that it doesn't be talked about enough, as he said, yeah, there's just a little bit of luck as well. Like, you have to be seen, has to be the right time, and you have to have someone to actually support you and be there. And those people for me were my parents. I was very fortunate to have, the parents who could help me, support me, have the financial terms. And most players, unfortunately, don't have that, but they do have the talent and everything to make it to the top.
Yeah, I think you're right. Those support systems are absolutely crucial, because without that support system, it doesn't matter how good you are. If your parents can't get you to, or if you turn up with a bad attitude and your coach thinks, because football's a game of opinions, you've got to have that ability, absolutely 100%. But it's a game of opinions, and everybody has an opinion.
Yeah.
One of the certain things that I don't like about football, where everybody believes that they're an expert because they've watched football on TV since they were kids and they played football. But when football's your job, it's like, I don't tell, I've driven cars longer than Lewis Hamilton has. I'm not going to go and tell Lewis Hamilton how to drive.
Yeah.
I'm not going to tell an expert how to do his job, and yet everybody feels that they can tell me how to do mine.
Yeah. And it's very important as well, because there's a times when, even if you work out, for example, you can read all the fitness books, work out, lift, but how do you know, can you do that process for other people, not just for yourself? I think for me, that determines, okay, if he's done it for this player, can he do it again and again? And can he probably get that player to do it to that other person? Then I feel like you can start calling yourself maybe not an expert, but someone who's just very good at what he does, right? And so brings back to the Barcelona camp, where there's actually a 17-year-old playing alongside with Messi. His name is Pedri, yet he's 17 years old. And I look at Messi as, okay, he's great, but he's also helped other players grow. And then when Messi is retired, then that 17-year-old kid will probably not step into Messi's shoes, but help other players grow and give them advice when they were 17. Right?
Yeah, I think you'd hope that'll happen. Whether it does or not is really down to the individual. And I get what you're saying about Messi there, but unless you're in the camp, we don't know. Messi might train every day and go home and not think about anybody else but himself. I don't know that. The only people that know that are the people that are around him. It makes to. I call it lending it back to the game. Other people, you might call it, paying it forward. If someone looked after you, then you owe it to the game to pass on your knowledge and expertise to those that are coming up behind you, whether that's other coaches or as a player for other players, and keep them on the straight and narrow when they start to stray. Keep their minds focused. Encourage them to do the right things, mainly because you do the right things, and they can see that the levels that you can get to.
Yeah. So in other words, be the example, set the example so others can follow that example and then pass that message to the next generation. Right?
100%.
Okay.
100%.
For sure. Well, I appreciate your time, Tony. I can't think of any more questions to ask you right now. I think we got pretty in depth of what it actually takes, or not what it actually takes, but some understanding of what you do and how it can actually benefit other players. Because I think the most important part that you said is that you can understand a player if he has what it takes, if he's good enough to be an assistant in 3 sessions. And a lot of players haven't heard that, and I haven't heard that yet. And I think that's super important, because maybe a player thinks they're good and they've already been watched, yet they don't know it. And they think, I've never been watched before. Right? Could have just been, next player, he doesn't have it.
Yeah.
Right.
No, again, look, I'm not saying that every coach can do that. I just believe that within 3 or 4 hours of seeing someone do a warm-up, how does he carry himself in a warm-up? Does he do it properly? Does he handle a ball properly? Has he got game intelligence when we start playing the game? Does he understand space? Does he understand his job? If he comes on trial, is he trying to do everything for him? Or is he still do his bit and work for the team? I think that those things, I've been done this now for 20 years.
Wow.
And if they've got those things, then they've got half a chance. Certainly with me, they might. They certainly have.
Okay. Last question then. How do you know when someone is doing things for themselves, even though they're passing the ball, they're creating opportunities, or is that right there how you know?
That's game intelligence for me.
Okay.
The player that makes the right decision for the situation is never going to be just doing it for him. But, trying to take on one player too many and losing them when there's a player in a better position doesn't show game intelligence.
Okay.
That's when he's doing it for himself.
Awesome. Well, I've written it down. That's something to keep in mind. But either way, Tony, I appreciate your time. Thank you very much for actually setting aside 40 to 45 minutes. I know over there it's, I believe, 9 p.m., right? Close to 9?
Just coming up to 8.
Oh, just coming up to 8. Well, either than that, again, I appreciate it, and have the rest of a good night, man.
No worries. Enjoy yourself.
Yep. Bye-bye.
See ya.